Okay, thank you. I may have to talk quickly, so please keep up if you can. I'm from Toronto and have done a lot of research in the COVID area, but also did some studies during SARS, if people remember way back in the early 2000s when we had SARS. And children were just as affected back then, right? And yet we didn't really learn, I don't feel, in terms of helping us prepare for future pandemics. Okay. It's not going down for some reason. Here we go. So if we think about, even just now, when we think about COVID, people have forgotten about how awful it was those first few months where we had no vaccines. We were afraid to be close to anyone, including those we loved. And the children, the young children, were the most affected and probably the most ignored, right? The most ignored. If we look at the impact just from a child rights perspective, there were so many rights that were violated with young children during that time. Right to information, many young children had no idea what was going on. The protection from harm is basically negated, right? We know the degree of abuse that occurred, particularly with young children. An adequate standard of living was not really there either. The right to education, school closures, childcare closures, the right to play. I mean, anybody who knows children knows how important it is for them to play. So many things taken away. And this is a very brief overview, but done a lot of reading in this area. And we've also done some wonderful work in the ISOP Enrich group under Nick's leadership in terms of compiling all kinds of work around COVID and the impact of COVID, right? But if we look at the young child, so many children during that time existed in incredibly stressful environments. And we know that children, young children in particular, are like sponges, right? We know that if they're surrounded by stress, they pick it up, it becomes toxic for them eventually. And anyone who's worked in hospitals know that if you have a stressful parent, you have a stressed out kid. It's that simple. And that's one piece of research that consistently gets validated, both in the research realm, but also in the practical and clinical realm, right? And then emotional upheaval. Young children experienced a huge amount of worry, anxiety, sleeplessness, which is a behavioral issue, many kinds of things. In terms of behavior, a lot of clinging behavior, lots of worries about parents leaving the house. What happens? Where are they going? So this entire sort of accumulation of stressors, loss of routine and predictability. We know how important predictability is for young children in order for them to feel a sense of safety, in order for them to be able to grow and develop in a healthy way. That was completely gone in many ways, right? Inconsistent parenting was another issue. Parents were stressed. They weren't doing the things that they might have done in the past. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they didn't have the same amount of time that they would have had with their children under normal circumstances, under normal routines. Increased risk of abuse. We know that young children are already more at risk for all kinds of abuse than older kids. And that there's reasoning for that on a variety of levels. But young children in particular experienced the most impactful and worst forms of abuse during that time. And of course, there was no safeguard because we had childcare settings that were closed. There were no educators. Even if they were a bit older and they went to elementary school, there was still no teacher there. There were still no people who could safeguard against some of these abuses. Loss of play opportunities, awful. I mean, I know in Toronto that they closed down the playgrounds. Children had nowhere to go. And of course, if you are a poor family living in a small apartment and the only place that you have is the park around the corner and you lose that, right? And then, of course, the school closures, which I've already mentioned, terribly devastating on many levels. And we're currently doing a critical review with Nick and other members of the Enrich group looking at the impact of school closures. And we're in the midst of reviewing a whole bunch of articles around that, and Gear is on that, and so is Hajime. I don't know if there's anyone else in here who's involved in that. Very important work. And of course, limited peer contact. And some of the clinical stuff that's coming out, because I'm in contact with pediatricians at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, and they are seeing all kinds of stuff coming up with young children now. Loss of language development, physical development, social skills. So we don't even know essentially what we might expect in the next few years. So just important, I think, to keep in mind the vulnerability of young children and the fact that they are often disregarded, often not given the information. And again, we're always dealing with, a child rights, public health, dichotomy where there's a tension there. And for whatever reason, public health directives always take precedence over children's rights. They just do. And so we've learned, I think, limited amount of information in terms of the way we transmit that information in the future, because we look at SARS, the same kinds of things happened, and then we just did it again. And if we look at research around pandemics, we don't learn from them. We just move on. The next pandemic happens, and we make the same mistakes. So anyways, something that really gets me riled up is the fact that we don't learn. Anyways, that's all I have time for, but wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts or questions.
Questions?
No, there's some on this side here too.
One at the back there.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. No, go.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about inconsistent parenting. You said that the parents might have not enough time to spend with their kids. How is it possible, even if you think about it, they were quarantined?
Right. So inconsistent parenting, that's a good question. There were other elements that made it inconsistent, right? So if their workplace had changed, if they were having to work from home, they could have tried to get a babysitter in. Sometimes they were put in places where they had to be, if a parent had to be online because of work. So there was a lot of inconsistency, lots of loss of routine and predictability. I know what you're saying, though. It kind of doesn't make sense.
Yes,
But,
exactly.
but there's a certain mindset, right, that was occurring during that time where stress would actually alter the way in which you would normally parent your child.
I mean, stress would exist even if there wasn't a quarantine, a lockdown, a pandemic. It doesn't seem much reasonable to me.
Right. But there was a huge amount of stress in the home during this time, more so than ever before. So I wouldn't
I've got
completely
one.
agree with that. I think it was, did you want to say something?
No.
Nick?
I'm just saying
Sorry?
that I'm pointing to the next
Okay.
question.
Sure. Rita?
Corner
Rita's back there. Hi, Rita.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. You had an interesting bullet about the intersection of public health and child rights. And I thought it was fascinating because from it, just thinking about, I guess, maybe being more in the child rights world, I feel like that is such a fantastic intersection. And so I think I'm just curious to know what would be strategies to strengthen that relationship in a positive way as opposed to in a conflicting way.
Right. And one of the things that we didn't do well during SARS or during COVID was to ask the children what they wanted. I mean, even school closures, children had no say, and yet they're the ones who were going to school. They had no say about the closures of playgrounds throughout the city. And so there is no connector there. There's no one listening or asking the children what it is they needed. Olivier?
Yeah, Olivier from Switzerland.
Yes.
I'm old enough to have been able to influence with Paul Bouvier, who was also a non-ESOP member, the decisions in the SARS period and all the other pandemics with my colleagues, the key is to be at the table with the, whoever's in charge of education, of keeping so you need public health, but you need the school leaders at political, practical level, whichever level you are. And the most convincing argument is going to be too complicated economically and for managing the parents. And from the health perspective, public health was really receptive to the fact that, yeah, what would be the organization if we close the schools? And we were not in the all society closure yet. And because what will happen? People will organize themselves with the building or with the neighborhood. So you have uncontrolled group of children who will continue spreading the infection. And public health was very receptive to that at local level. COVID is another story, and I just add this. It's like for migrant parents, where they go in a zone, they are so stressed, they almost forget they have a child with them.
Yeah.
And this is one of the psychological mechanisms, which you can call it survival skill or survival reflex at one point. But we can talk about it later on.
Right. Thank you, Olivier.
There's a lady behind you.
Hi, Natalia from Canada as well.
Hi, Natalia.
I just wanted to make a quick comment because you have, and maybe build up on the youth representative. I think parents themselves didn't know what they feel, so they had to go through the emotions themselves, understanding how they feel before they could even think about parenting. So I do agree with your point about that period where we did not know what we were doing ourselves. But another piece that it would be interesting to know is like the opinion of the teachers and how that has affected the learning of the children. Specifically, I'm talking from personal experience. My second child has difficulties with reading because during the pandemic, they were trying to pronounce words in French, and they had to see how the mouth of the child learn that.
Right. And then we had
That's-
masks on, right?
And we had masks
Right.
on. And I think it also has to be taken into considerations the level of restrictions. So from Canada, for example, New Brunswick, where I come from, it was the most strict province in terms of regulations. Whereas in Europe, people could visit other people. We had limited to 10 people in our bubble. Another thing to take in consideration is support system. So COVID may have impacted parents or children even more where there was no support system in place. So if you are in your own country and you have a built-in system, you had grandparents, you had other relatives
Right.
who would support you and support parenting. But for people who are immigrants, where it's only two or one parent, that would even be more.
For sure. And
More
so
effective.
inconsistency just increases there.
That's correct.
But the one thing that's different is that adults were only managing one world. Children were managing two worlds, right? The world of childhood, which is playing, being with your friends, having contact in a regular world, and also navigating all the healthcare issues that they had to deal with. I mean, I had one child tell me in a study that we did at the time that they were wearing a mask, and they realized how important it was for them to wear a mask. And they were particularly concerned about their teacher who was pregnant. You see, so they were navigating both the childhood world and the adult world. So as much as I felt for parents, if you look at the young child trying to navigate that in two worlds at the same time and having to get it right. And I thought children generally did an amazing job at washing hands, wearing a mask, using, sanitizer on their hands all the time, and having to navigate all that in the midst of their needs being subsided. I mean, and those are my views, but I've also done a lot of reading around this, and I'm a strong advocate of children's rights. Thank you, everybody.